All right, welcome to episode number 42 of the Songwriter's Couch. We're on episode 42. I almost said 43 after I just said 42, if I can believe that. I think we've done too many episodes this week. We're trying to fill up the catalog before I go away for a little bit, not to prison or anything, so I didn't go to any Diddy parties, so don't worry about that. But I'm going to be going out of town for a little while, so we got to kind of have some in the backlog. But
out of town for a little while.
That's right. But thank you, everyone, for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you to our sponsors, all of that. I've shortened up that little spiel a little bit so that I can introduce my world-renowned guest here, Phil Maves, everybody. Phil Maves, everybody.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you.
So why don't you take a moment and tell people what you do, where they can find your stuff, and how they can follow you on social media.
On social media.
Don't go following him
out the door,
in real life.
down the street.
That's right.
Tailing
Unless you have ice cream and you're in a truck, like a white van.
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah. Mr. Softy. Let's not go there.
That's right. I used to be a Mr. Softy
really?
truck driver, back in the day.
For how long?
It's surprising that you know Mr. Softy, because you lived in New York.
I did, but did you
we'll get into that.
Did you just get rid of one of my two truths and a lie?
Maybe. Well, that's why I don't want to get too deep into it. So, all right. Well, go ahead and tell people where you can, where they could find
everybody.
You.
So, Phil Maves, recording under the name Wild Decade, and you can find all of our music everywhere on your favorite streaming platforms and on socials, everywhere under Wild Decade, or there might be an @Wild Decade, right? If you're on Facebook.
That was too quick. I didn't get a chance to swallow
Twitter,
my cognac I was drinking.
Yeah, wherever you want to go.
All right, excellent. So go ahead and follow him. What is it you do, Phil, in the band?
Yeah, I sing, I write songs. I'm the primary songwriter. It's been kind of a rotating cast of characters and friends. I've had some more long-term collaborators, like my buddy Dan Leach out in somewhere else, because now I'm going to double down and we're both going to get rid of one of my two truths right here by accident.
Excellent. So it's very apropos that you're the lead songwriter, because, of course, we're the Songwriter's Couch. So maybe that's why we booked. Why we booked you.
Yeah,
so, you're a songwriter.
Yeah.
So we met. Did we meet initially at Love and Cup? Was that the first time we've met?
It was. It was a couple times at Love and Cup, and I think it was maybe I was kind of knocking the rust off and getting back into performing again. I am originally from Rochester, but I've, as we kind of have telegraphed here a little bit, I've lived in a lot of different places and, mostly for work, but I was making music and writing, performing, recording, producing, doing different things. And, kind of coming back to Rochester over these last several years, it's been great to be back. It's how I met my wife and, kind of built this next stage of my life up. And kind of just realized I should go start playing music again and kind of pick it up again. And we met at Love and Cup. I think we met twice. Once was like a real quick, hi, how are you?
Yeah.
And it was this last time, maybe a month or so ago, that we talked a little bit more after we both performed. So that was the place. Matt and the whole crew there are great. And
I love Matt. He's really like someone that like I appreciate when he's on sound there, because you're going to get a decent sound.
Oh yeah.
When you go and play, because sometimes at open mics it's just whatever haphazard speaker they found in the garbage and maybe a cup with a string attached to it, So the sound there I always appreciate. But before we get too deep into that, we're going to go into our segment titled Two Truths and a Lie, where I try and get to know our guests a little bit better. So you're prepared to tell us a few things. I always forget what to call them. Three statements potentially of fact. I'm going to change the title of this segment to that. 3 statements potentially of fact. And we're back. All right, Phil, what do you got for us?
So 2 truths and a lie.
Yes, correct. Two of the statements will be true. 1 will be a fib.
Okay. Here we go. I've worked for one of the most famous companies in the world.
Okay.
I ran the New York City Marathon. I was kicked out of preschool.
Yikes. I could definitely see the last one being the case. Just from the look in your eye, Phil.
Okay.
The twinkle in your eye tells me.
Looks like a preschool dress.
That's right. That's right. Was that the end of your school career after preschool? Or just out of that particular preschool?
We'll see. What do you
All right.
think?
Yeah, we can't clarify too much here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, well, you look pretty trim, pretty fit. So the marathon thing, that could be the case. But you never can tell with that sort of thing.
Is that only in New York City, or do they have that up here?
The New York City Marathon?
No, Mr. Softy Truck.
Mr. Softy Truck is generally, I believe, a New York City thing.
There's a Curb Your Enthusiasm kind of subplot in one episode.
Is there?
Yeah. So yes, that's a correct answer for that question.
So then
But that's your question for Patrick. So.
Yeah. I know where I'm headed. What do you think, Ellie?
So work, marathon, preschool. Which is true, which is the lie?
Worked for one of the most famous.
I'm gonna go marathon because I just think running is disgusting.
Well, I've done several marathons, some ultras too in the past. So, as you can tell, the look of someone has nothing to do with whether or not they've run a marathon or not. But I'm going to probably go. I'm going to go with the preschool, the kicked out of preschool, even though I kind of feel like that is true. Yeah. All right, ready? So I got to.
So you're saying that's your
I'm
vote
saying
for the
that's
fake
the
one.
lie. Yeah.
That's the lie, and you're saying marathon is lie, Allie. Okay. Marathon's the lie.
Oh.
My wife ran the New York City Marathon.
All right. Are you
Quite well.
Are you a runner?
No.
At all? No.
No, I'm a
Not at all?
spectator. No,
All
I
right.
just cheer her on when she runs.
Well,
That's it.
congratulations to her for
Yes.
for running it. I'm supposing probably didn't win it, right? Because it's usually people that are running it in like 15 minutes or something ridiculous.
Well, she did better than I did. I mean,
That's true. Well, I've
she
never.
was. Somebody actually asked me this the other day. Her time, if she doesn't mind me saying this, she was 4:08.
That's a
43.
very good. That's a very
down
good
to the
time.
second.
Listen, I've done marathons where I'm in the like five.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing to.
No,
if you finish
was
a
incredible.
marathon,
Yeah.
it's a huge accomplishment. The amount of like just what is that called? Commitment it takes just to even like I was going to say rehearse for it. Like I'm talking about band practice, but to train for it is ridiculous. Which is why I don't run marathons anymore because I don't have the time to train for it. So
And I don't at all.
So which one was the marathon was the lie?
Was the lie.
So why did you get kicked out of preschool then, Phil?
Well, the
Counterfeiting?
No, but the problem wasn't so much that I was getting up and walking away from the circle with the teacher and the kids and reading on my own. It was that the kids followed me.
So you were always the leader of the
unintentional troublemaker. I was just reading. I just wanted to read. I was enjoying myself, and the next thing you knew, I was too subversive for the class. So that was the problem. And there was a discussion with my folks. And
Hey, listen,
it became
that's not a bad thing. I used to always get in trouble for stuff like that, for kind of like starting trouble. I think it's an entertainment thing, like being an entertainer. You want to like get people on your side or whatever. So what are you?
The company, you can just go to my
are you
LinkedIn
willing?
because I'm there as Phil Maves, and you can go through and you'll go, oh, okay.
I'm guessing you no longer work for that.
No.
Whatever that company is. Or,
Yeah, that was a long time ago. Nothing bad, obviously.
Yeah.
But like I just for the sake of keeping the conversation going.
Well,
But
now I got to know you a little bit better,
Yeah.
Phil. So I like it.
Thank you.
So let's get into this. How did you first get into, I guess, deciding that you were going to not just listen to music, because I'm assuming probably you liked music from an early age, and maybe some people in your family were either musicians or were into music really intensely or whatever. How did you first start getting into like, I want to either play an instrument or sing or write songs or perform or what have you? What was your kind of first inspiration?
it was exactly that. I think it's typical for a lot of people. So my folks would always play music around the house, and they were into the whole gamut of things. My dad was probably into, a bit of Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and my mom was into opera and classical, and between the two of them, they listened to, Blondie and everything, whatever was coming out of the late 70s, early 80s that was like a long train of music that they liked. Always mixtapes in the car, all kinds of things like that. So they always played music. They loved music. My father played guitar a bit when he was younger. There were musical people in my family. My grandmother played piano. And,
Were there instruments kind of laying around the house ever? Or
there was a little nylon string guitar, which I think I just kind of bashed away at. But really, I wanted to just kind of play drums initially. I sang all the time in the house, but I started drumming. They wouldn't get me a kit, but they said, okay, we'll settle on sticks. And then eventually I said, okay, guitar. So I started lessons, I think, when I was about 8.
Oh, nice.
Roughly.
Right, so you actually took formal guitar lessons.
I did, but I mean, really stylistically, as a guitarist, I'm a songwriter. I'm not a lead guitarist. You know
That's where. So my older brother was always the technical lead guitar. Like I've told the story on the show before, but he learned to like play Van Halen solos by ear,
right?
And like just learned like Eruption by ear, which is crazy. So I always kind of took the backseat. I actually started on bass and then got into like a rhythm guitar, and but I was in marching band when I was a kid too, which I think that really set in my mind like the rhythmic thing. I was going at that, and of course in Queens in the 80s was like hip hop. So I had like hip hop, Michael Jackson. My dad's like classic rock background. Yeah. My older brother was into like hair metal, and then he was playing lead guitar. So I was in this same kind of situation as you, where I was like, you know what, I want to write songs. So when did you first? So you started learning guitar,
and I played cello in the school orchestra too.
Oh wow!
So that gave me that whole appreciation for 4 strings and like a baritone sound and like that melancholy thing.
Can you still play a cello now?
I mean, if you hand it to me, I can kind of whack away, but it's not going to be anything spectacular. It's I don't know. I think I read a quote from like Tom Waits or somebody who said something like, well, I'm better if I don't know how to do something. I don't know that I totally agree with that, but I get what he's talking about. The idea that if you're really interested in doing something, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, but I think there's also something to that. As a matter of fact, the last show with Greg, my piano player, we were talking about that because he's kind of classically trained, knows a lot of theory, and was in like the military bands and that sort of thing.
That's important too.
And so, like, I know literally nothing about about theory, and I'm starting now to kind of learn a little bit more about it. Yeah. But there's something to not knowing the rules that allows you to also do things that break the rules, where people will be like, oh, that's interesting what you're doing, but it's not necessarily that you're doing it on purpose. It's just you don't know that there are rules that should prevent you from doing what you were doing. Yeah. Right? Which definitely Tom Waits, I would assume, is in that mindset of like breaking the rules a little bit, you know?
But then I'd look at somebody like that, and you have to realize that that's a persona as well. So if somebody's saying something in an interview, it's kind of like, oh, let me write that down. That's really good. You know, so it's a great quote, right? Is it entirely true? Well, not really. It's kind of like there's a lot of really good musicians and songwriters, I think, in certain styles who maybe hide some of their skill a little bit because it depends on what era they came up in or who their contemporaries were, or they don't want to give too much away.
What do you mean by that? Like era? Like,
well, I think he cultivated a persona that was a little more like kind of ragtag, you know, like a Bowery bum sort of thing, as they used to say. But that wasn't exactly who he was. He could play the piano really beautifully. Yeah. Right? So there's a bit of that. And like Robert Smith from The Cure, people sort of just get blinded by the hair and the makeup.
You're giving away my whole shtick here, Phil, all right?
Yeah. Here we go.
Classically trained.
Yeah. You know, the sort of people stop at the image or say, oh, that's that guy who just kind of moans, but his melodies are extraordinary and his guitar playing is really good.
That always
really quite good.
That's actually an interesting thing too, because there is a level of PR you have to do in cultivating kind of an image and the story about why someone should be into you. You know, like I think of every great musician or artist or whatever that I like, and it's them. You know, and sometimes that actually can be a detriment, because if you go see them play live or you watch them in an interview and they're not, or you realize, oh, that's just a thing they're putting on, sometimes that can actually be off-putting a little bit. Yeah. You know? Yeah. But when did you,
but I think it's also a little bit of a defense mechanism too, and a protection that some people do, especially as they get more successful, a way to sort of put up a barrier and say, well, this is me, but it's sort of an exaggerated version of me, or I'm going to throw you off. I'm thinking, like we talked about Norm Macdonald earlier. Yeah. And he used to have this thing where he would feign, and this is obviously comedy, but he had this thing where he'd sort of feign that he was not very bright. Right. He'd say, oh, these people saw me on Weekend Update. They wanted me to come in and have these intense political discussions over dinner. He said, I don't know anything. I just read jokes. But he read a lot of Russian literature. He was an intelligent person, you know. So there's a lot of misdirection, I think, that goes into it to either protect yourself or create an image a little bit.
I wonder now. So I grew up and you're kind of in my age range, right? And so like the early 90s, like 91 to like 97 probably, I'd say, was that whole grunge kind of era where that was definitely a thing. It was like if you were thought to be out playing music to be successful and make money as an image thing, like in interviews, if you said, "Yeah, I really want our band to be successful," it was almost like a black mark on your on your career. And then after that, though, there was like the early 2000s, probably into now, where success is seen as like, oh, the more popular people are good. Like during that particular era, is very like frowned upon to be,
I think there's a few reasons for that too, and it's interesting you talk about that era, because if you look at the old publications or you look at what people were talking about, go find old video interviews or whatever it is on YouTube, for example, what you're getting from the sort of alternative and grunge artists is the complete opposite of their hip hop contemporaries.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the philosophy that actually won out to where we are today, I think, a little bit more. And then also it doesn't hurt that tech was so disruptive. A lot of the dollars dried up. The labels were very caught flat-footed, in my opinion, about how to adapt to those things. Napster, and then they were a little late to iTunes and everything. And it eventually happened, but I think people kind of had to, rethink what they were doing and what was a compromise and what was simply exposure and promotion, right? There's still artists today, I feel like, that would still see, like the REM kind of, REM's a great example, right? They would we'll never do an ad. We're not going to do that stuff. And even to this day, they've never, to my knowledge, sold anything to a product for a commercial, but they've definitely been in movies and TV.
Unlike U2, which is literally
went full in with Steve Jobs and the iPhone.
That was a crazy PR thing, yeah.
That one people I think were a little more okay with, but then when they put the record on people's devices, that was a little different. And they've admitted since then. I read something where Bono was like,
that was a mistake.
Yeah, maybe we were a little heavy-handed. We didn't give people a choice. That's all they had to do was just say yes or no. Check the box.
So, was that era when you first started songwriting, or was it later on, earlier on?
Yeah, I mean, I was playing, I did the typical thing kids do at that point where you play in bands with your friends and you make things up. You learn a few covers just to figure out how does a song work.
Yeah.
And then from there you start making things up that are pretty terrible. I found a cassette that, oh gosh, I must have been 12, and it's just me scratching titles. There's no vocals. It's just me with maybe my first electric guitar, and I'm just bashing chords in a pointless sequence. And I had, taken lessons and I had some theory background from cello and everything, but it's terrible. Yeah. It's really terrible. I listened to it and I just thought, what was I doing? I think I just wanted to play all the chords in a sequence and say I did it. And that's one song. And then the next thing is something else. But I think that was even before I started playing with friends. So it evolved, I think, the way it does for a lot of people who play kind of guitar-based music, let's just call it that, right? Without even picking a genre or style. You just get together with people, you tinker on your own, you find other people who kind of think the same way a little bit about music as you do, or you find the opposite, people who have a different background, and you just put it together. So I think it really kind of started around then. And I was always in the mindset of bands. Even now, as Wild Decade, it's kind of a band, but it isn't necessarily a band. It's more of just an alter ego or a recording idea to put it under. I mean, my last name is pretty distinct, Maves. It stands out a little bit. And if you've met somebody with that name, there's a near 100% chance I'm related to them in some way. Right. So the name is unique. That's not bad. But I think I just always grew up with the idea of, at the very least, it either becomes a group or it's just another identity to have that gives you an extra layer. So
I always like the ability to have a band, but then also do kind of a solo thing too. And I've always had this and this is a goal of mine to actually put out a kind of a solo record that's kind of just me playing kind of all the instruments or what have you, or just having full control over everything, and releasing stuff in maybe a genre I wouldn't normally do, or something that's a little bit more experimental that isn't meant to necessarily be songs that, kind of like a Pink Floyd's The Wall, where it's, I've written an album called Mask that's kind of in that world, but I really want to do it from scratch, because that was kind of like taking songs that were already in existence and writing a story on it and having it be a thing. I kind of like the idea of almost like your mom used to like opera, but kind of writing an opera. But in my weird way of doing it. You know, and then releasing that and seeing, you know, having everyone hate me for
What is
releasing
this?
a bunch of garbage. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what triggered in my mind though, as you were talking there, was my daughter is just learning to write songs and play and what have you, and she wants to go out and perform. One of the things that I think took me a while to get to was strong song structure, and that's both as I've gotten, I guess, more mature as a songwriter, gotten simplified and more complex at the same time, where I've tried to simplify it so that when someone hears it for the first time, it's memorable, but the arrangement of it keeps it interesting, you know, which is a very difficult thing to do, to have a simple thing that has a structure. But when I try and show my daughter, I realize sometimes I say things that now I know that she doesn't know. Like, okay, you have like an intro, you have, you know, the verse, you have the pre-chorus. You know, I don't like a lot of pre-choruses, but I tend to go just verse right into chorus.
Right into chorus.
But like, you know, the differences in the parts of it, of having a bridge in there, all of that sort of thing. Is that something that you follow even? So I've noticed some newer songwriters don't know typical song structures, and so it's actually almost more interesting. Like you were saying, you listened to an old thing of you where you didn't know anything and you're just slamming stuff around. And I kind of almost like that. I like going to open mics and watching new songwriters get up on stage and do that, because they don't know what they're doing right or wrong or whatever.
That wasn't even what you're describing, because what you're describing is instinctive, and there's a real charm to that when someone doesn't exactly, they know just enough. It's like they say, you know enough to be dangerous. What you're talking about is somebody who's at least coherent enough to say, I remember I'm going to play this exact sequence of chords. I'm going to shift the melody here. I've maybe got these words. Now what I was describing was just a 12-year-old going, well, I'm going to just go from G to F to
right, because those are the chords, you know.
Not even that. What I just described right now, see, intuitively, I just said G to F to C. That makes sense musically. We weren't even in that world. And it wasn't like, oh, wait till you see my melodic twist here that I do when I go to this flat versus the, no. There was nothing like that. But I know what you mean. And
so what I'm kind of getting to is where did you learn, or when did you start realizing, oh, I need to like kind of have a structure that I can push against to make a song that's going to be, you know.
I'm just playing with people who are better than me. I had friends who were faster at writing songs and more adept and a little bit, I think maybe they had the patience or the ear for it that I didn't. And I had to really just humble myself and kind of go, they're better, aren't they? They know what they're doing. I've got some things that are okay, but it's not quite
right?
there.
Because when you first start playing too, you kind of want to be a rock star and be like, oh, I'm gonna be the next.
It's like, I have to work at this.
Yeah, next John Lennon or whatever. Yeah, it takes a lot of years of.
There's a lot of patience. I don't think I wrote a good song till I turned 30.
Is that was going to be the next question I asked you? Is like, when is the first time you wrote a song and you were like, you know what, that's a good song, and consistently you think, yeah, that was a good song. You listen back to it.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a good quote or something, right? Like for somebody who's a little older like me doing this. But I mean, it's kind of true. And I'm not even talking about, that is not reflective of the bands I was in and people I co-wrote with, where you've got like 4 or 5 people writing together or a main songwriter or two, and I'm contributing to the music. That I mean, just like literally on my own. I'd written a bunch of things by myself, and then some were good, and then I got to another point where I was like, oh, that's another step up. This is way bigger. This is a much better song emotionally. The lyric is there, the melody is there, the chord progression is there, but there's something extra in it that's like a feel to the song. And I was good with structure by that point, I think. I could make something happen. I didn't overthink it too much, but I think, just that younger period when you're just full of so much like arrogance, but a lot of insecurity at the same time. And it's just this mess that's happening.
Yeah.
I think that's where I was like, if I'm going to get better, I have to just accept that there's other people around me who are pretty good, and I should pay attention to what they're doing. And like, oh, that makes sense. That's why they did that. And that's all.
So when you approach writing a song, and I say that loosely, approach writing a song, because for me, I'd say 90% of the time, it's me not trying to write a song. I'm sitting around like, hanging out with either other musicians, or I'm just sitting on the couch, or we're having a party. I'm sitting in a corner playing guitar like a what is that called? The emo, like an emo kid sitting in the corner with my guitar.
It's way over there.
That's right.
Off camera.
And something just kind of comes out, and it usually starts with me writing some sort of a chord progression or something. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. You know, I'm playing around, or I just learned a cover, and there's some chord or way that shape is that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I maybe incorporate that into what I'm doing, or it makes me think about a progression a little bit differently. Like, how do you first start writing a song? I guess now even versus when you first wrote, you know, you first started writing songs, I guess.
It's not dissimilar to what you're describing, where I'm not thinking of something, and very often it's like a melody and a lyric idea for maybe like a chorus or some hook just kind of comes to me because I'm not really thinking I should be playing music, I should be writing songs, but it just happens. There's other times too, I'll just be playing and you're working on something else, very, very focused. It's like anything where they almost say, think of something, be very, deliberate and very focused. It's like when you're trying to come up with an idea or solve a problem and you really focus on it, and then the moment you drop it and your brain shuts off a little bit, you eventually get there. And I think sometimes that happens too. So if it's not just a random moment of like a little bit of inspiration, I'm sitting there doing something, I'm playing other material of mine maybe, or just doodling around. And then, there's the next thing. There's the next idea. And then from there, it just feels like that's where the craft comes in. Like, I got to have to hammer this into shape a little bit better. Right. Sometimes you get the whole thing. Sometimes you get a complete chorus or maybe a verse into a chorus. And you kind of follow it and let it happen. Other times it's like, okay, there's something here, but it's going to need more work.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes to mind there is like who was it? The sculptor, Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo. Speaking of Diddy parties, Leonardo da Vinci. And I don't know if this is actually a quote from him, but where the stone, like the sculpture is in the stone, and he just has to kind of release it from the stone. I feel like songs sometimes come from who knows where, and it's not necessarily me. It's like I'm remembering it. Is what the feeling is when something. Because there are songs that I've written that in like 5 minutes it's out, and there's lyrics written, there's the whole and it's like where I don't know where that came from, and there are times where of course I know where it came from. I guess like what's your one of your favorite songs? Because one, we can tell everyone to go check out your favorite song that you've written if it's out and released somewhere.
I mean, there's a few different ones that I can kind of give an example.
And maybe a story behind.
I want to go back to one thing you said, though, that was interesting about the sculpture analogy. Have you ever heard of the songwriter Scott Walker? His whole life, he was an American songwriter who played in a 60s group called the Walker Brothers. They weren't brothers and they weren't named Walker, but they went over to the UK and got huge there. They were kind of just session musician types and just random singers, and they just sort of had a sound that worked, and they went over there. His whole life story is really interesting. He was a big influence on people like David Bowie, and there was a whole documentary about him a little over a decade ago, and it's got Radiohead in it, since you were talking Radiohead, and like Jarvis Cocker from Pulp, and all these different people kind of talking about the influence of his songs, because it sort of went from being this rain cloud, 60s, Righteous Brothers sound. By the time he was solo, until he died, it just went in a completely different direction. It would be some of the most avant-garde stuff you've ever heard. It's really odd. And he described his writing process as he got older as shaving it down, and almost like painting or sculpture. And it's kind of like, this doesn't work. And it's not about adding, it's about just constantly striking things and subtracting things. I think editing is one of the most underrated things as a songwriter. And sometimes you need a collaborator, a bandmate, a friend, a producer, somebody to go, no, it's too much. Like, you don't need all of this. And you have to, that I think is maybe one of the best disciplines you can have. And I'm not saying I do it so well, but it's always there, and it's less is more. There's been times, I'll give you an example. There's a song called Frontier, and that was a song that was one of the first that I wrote that I thought was good, and I still play it now. I released it as a single a long time ago, and it's gotten a good response whenever I've played it. And it's already a pretty short song. It's very much like you said, you don't like the pre-chorus always. It's very much, there's like a little intro. It's a 2-chord song with one kind of bridge where it just pivots and shifts
Right.
up half a step, just giving away what it is.
Yeah, like a
But-
key change, or it's just
just a little key change, but then it goes back. But it only holds on one chord. And the whole thing in my head, I had vaguely told myself, hey, it'd be great to write a song with as few chords as possible and still have it be catchy and interesting.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of had that as a general thought. It was not like an exercise.
Yeah.
Eventually just hit on the idea. It was a melody, and I just had the two chords. Started minor. I was like, no, it should be major. It should be almost like a blues, but not really, because that's not what I do, right? And that wouldn't be real if I did that in a lot of ways. It wouldn't be believable, right, coming out of this. So I just, it seemed to be about, the lyric is just about being out of place, right? It's just about being in a situation or an environment or a city or a country where you are completely...
Say the title one more time.
Frontier, where you're just...
By Film Maves.
Wild Decade.
By
Yeah.
Wild Decade. So
Yeah.
is that out on...
Oh, yeah,
is
it's
it
on all the
released?
streaming platforms.
So
You
check
can hear
out...
it.
Yeah,
It
check
was... Yeah, I'll come back to it in a moment, but lyrically, it's just anybody who's ever felt totally out of place. So but there's a little humor to it in the bridge. Like, it's not completely woe is me. Like, it's a little tongue in cheek. And musically speaking, it's more up tempo. It's a little shuffly, but that was one where I thought, okay, that's a good song. That makes sense. And it very much is like a quick intro. There's a verse, there's a chorus, there's a second verse, there's a chorus, there's a little breakdown with a repeat chorus. Then it goes into this little shift, and on the recording, the synths are going crazy.
Yeah.
Like it sort of explodes a little bit on this little key change. And then it delivers a little bit of a punchline. Sometimes I do a longer lyric there, sometimes I don't. And then it sort of breaks down and comes back up with a repeat chorus, and it's done. And the whole thing's done in 2:30, maybe 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And when I've been playing it live recently, I dug it up again because I was like, I kind of forgot about that song. It's been out there for a while. It was the first official recording I ever released under, and it was originally under the name The Actors. That was like a solo thing I was doing, which I'll talk about in a bit. But now it's under the name Wild Decade. I just pulled everything together because I was like, well, it's all me. I may as well just have one name.
Yeah.
But that was one where even now, as I play that song and have brought it back, I'm going, is 2 minutes and 30 seconds too long for a crowd that's never heard this music? Should I just like trim it, shave it down, right? Sculpt it?
Yeah.
Should I keep editing it as I go? And sometimes I kind of just look at the room and I'm like, okay, everybody's into this. This is cool. I'm going to let it finish. And other times I'm like, well, okay, they're still getting used to me here, and maybe this person got up and that's there, but I'm in the moment and I enjoy it, but I'm not going to forget that there's people listening to somebody for the first time they've never heard, who's also playing an original and demanding a lot of their attention or hoping they get their attention. So I'll be like, it's going to be the 2 minute, 10-second version tonight. It's going to be like a Beatles 63 single kind of thing, and that's the version you get. And then it's like, okay, that's a good way to start it, right? So sometimes I'll do that one a little earlier. Just as an example.
So one of the things that's interesting. Maybe we can extend this by like 10 minutes. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you. So one of the things that reminds me of too. There's a poet. And I forget if it was either Pablo Neruda or I forget who it was. But there's a famous quote about editing, where it's like, okay, you want a piece of poetry to be just exactly the amount of words that are necessary to get across. Because as soon as you start, I mean, there's like Jack Kerouac books that's just like literary, vomiting.
Stream of consciousness
but
almost.
Great too. It's like candy for your brain. Like you're reading it, but you're not trying to he's not necessarily trying to get an idea across. He's trying to get you into his mindset. And there's that kind of songwriting like Fish, right? Where that's, it's all over the place or whatever. But I prefer the distilled thing, and we're drinking some cognac here. And what I found too is great as most art, and things like food and just things that I'm very passionate about tend to be the result, or the things that I love are the result of that exact process of like distilling it down to what is the best part of all that, or the most concise exploration of the thing, right? Like wine or cognac is the distillation of the grapes and the alcohol, and then aging it in a barrel to give it some flavor around it or whatever. So I guess the next thing I want to get into, because I just went off on a huge tangent there, but I want to get into more of where you are now with regards to performing. And I know we talked a little bit before about your band and the name of it, and you having it in both California or on the West Coast happening, some of it happening in New York here. Like, what is your, I guess, goals and your aspirations for your musical journey? I hate saying journey, but you know, where you think you're going with what you're doing musically from here.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's a plan of any kind. I was always very ambitious in everything I did and very organized. We were always the band that came into the studio with spreadsheets, right? Of like, no, we're prepared. We know what's going on every track. We know how the pedals are supposed to be set. We're ready to track everything. And so to come away from that a little bit, the discipline is still there, but I think there isn't like a master plan of then my next milestone is this, then I do this. But I do always appreciate having deadlines and making commitments to things. And that's actually how I got the first show when it was just me solo. I'm kind of coming back a little bit where there's still a band name as Wild Decade, but right now it's kind of just me. And it's a rotating cast of people. Like my friend Dan Leach, who was in the band with me for a long time, we collaborated. So I'd be the primary songwriter, but after a while, like that kind of trust builds, there's good chemistry, we have a similar sense of humor. So now he's bringing in music, and I'm going, oh, that's great. And I'd write a melody and a lyric to it. So there's some collaboration there. But I think at this point, it's mostly just about having great songs, making sure that I can be prepared enough to perform them well and just keep going, because something interesting always happens and I make a connection or talk to somebody, or somebody I think is really good and I should play with. The introductions happen. I'm letting it be a little more organic at this point while still being disciplined enough with the music. And I think that's just the way I kind of do things.
Is it more live performance you want to do, or are you looking to record more?
I would record again for sure. I've done so much of it over the years, and but right now I'm enjoying playing and just kind of getting back into it, like knocking the rust off. Right, is kind of how I put it.
That's you've said that now multiple times.
Yeah.
So where was the span of time where you were not doing that?
Oh, it was probably 3 or 4 years. I mean, I would play in the background, get together with friends. I have friends now that was in a band with in my teens, and we're still tight, and we get together, and sometimes we write songs, sometimes we just play and make up ideas, sometimes we just kind of hang out together. And I enjoy doing that. And then I knew I still had all this other material at the same time that was just sort of laying dormant, and I enjoyed it. And so why would I just leave it? So it was actually my wife who encouraged me and said, I think you miss doing this. She's like, I know you don't need it. Like your ego doesn't need it. I had to, I think, get to a point where I just thought, I don't care what anybody thinks of this. And it's not that you don't want to have an audience. You do. And like it just made the point of saying, I'm noticing how the crowd is reacting, right? But I think what I mean by that is not so much about the response to the music or are people having a good time. Those are important things. It's more, am I doing something because I enjoy doing it, or am I looking for someone to tell me I'm great? And I have to be doing it because I enjoy doing it. So I put it down for a long time just to make sure I was doing it in my mind for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And so now it just feels very much like I'm just prepared with some material, and I come in and do some songs and see how it goes and go from there. I would always record again. I would do those things, but right now I'm just playing and enjoying it and see what happens.
Yeah. No, and that's, I think sometimes you can lose track of that too, especially if people are, you've got a band, and sometimes, especially if it's your primary source of income, you've definitely got to look at it as a business, and you've got to think about it in that way, and that sometimes can interject into the art, unfortunately. But I think also the same way I've looked at songwriting and how I need to adjust my songwriting to become better, I think from that aspect of a business too, I've found joy in trying to find the balance of like, okay, balancing this as a business, but also not jeopardizing the, my songwriting or my art for it, and just writing pop songs just to write, something that people dance to, having it still be something that that I'm proud of. I guess what for a new songwriter,
Well, I was going to say you hit on something that I wanted to respond to, because that's kind of how it was for me for a while when I was still on the West Coast. There was a period where that was what I did and what we did. And so, yeah, you think of all the different revenue streams. You think of your publishing. You think of, I'm with BMI. You have to do all of that. Then there's the legal things, and then there's the booking and all that stuff. And there was a point, I think, where it got a little bit, it became a bit of a grind in a way, and it should be, I think, but I also kind of missed some other things. So I that was one reason why I think I also began to let it recede a little bit and let it ebb and flow. Like, let me come back in a bit and look at it again in 6 months. Right?
I wonder if that's a detriment to our generation of musicians too. That whole grunge era really instilled in me that sense too. Like, I still want to love it. I mean, the hair metal bands of the 80s didn't give a shit about whether or not they had their heart in it. They were like, let's sell. Like Kiss is just a marketing machine, right? They're just selling, making money. That's it, right? But then, Nirvana and all those bands came along and were like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to make actual music and blah, blah, blah. But those successful bands were definitely businesses. They were generating money and had some.
They all did.
Yeah, they had this
that industry was what it was then. Yeah. And CDs, like, you'll hear people talk about this, repressing things on CDs as well as just the introduction of CDs kept it afloat for another decade.
Yeah. But I think that might have held back a lot of musicians and stuff from our era, from like really trying to, okay, let's make this a business. Let's make it successful monetarily so that we can do this all the time. That's right. Yeah. And there's a way to do that you still retain, your integrity and all that stuff. So what piece of advice, I guess, would you give for, new upcoming songwriters or people starting a band or anything like that, would have helped you back in the day that maybe you just learned recently?
Well, what I would say to somebody else is different than maybe what I would say to younger me. I would say to anybody now, just do what you're enjoying and don't be afraid to edit. Don't be afraid to chop down what you're doing and have a critical eye for what you make. There's no shame in that. And it's also a little bit genre dependent. If you're making ambient music or something that's meant to be soundscapes or a little bit longer, more epic, great. Just make it be that best expression of what you can do. But I don't know that I have any great advice to give anybody. I just kind of feel like people have to figure some of these things out. I'm always going to say, go back and edit, be tough on yourself, but don't be too tough. And I would say, going into the next part of that, my advice to my younger self would have just been, you got to take it easy. Like, really, you're just way too intense about all this, and it's actually blocking you from being even better, faster. I think that was absolutely the biggest thing. I remember myself in my teens and even in my early 20s, and it just gripped a little too much. It took too long. I just wanted it too much, and I think I was a little too intense about it.
What do you mean by that? By like in terms of your perfectionism on what you were doing, or just...
Yeah, perfectionism, and I think just the ability to... Sometimes people use emotions as fuel for creativity. I had this great experience, or I had this terrible experience, or I'm heartbroken, or I'm angry. Whatever it is that drives people to be creative in certain moments. Sometimes it's an incident. And I think I would let those things overwhelm me, and I would know logically in my head, like, oh, this could be something that I could use in a productive way to make something creative. But then I just would be too, just whatever it was, and I'd let it take over too much. And so I thought I was unproductive because of that. I felt it too much. I couldn't sort of balance and step away a little bit. And that's why I think it took me longer to kind of pull some things together. I know that I was always good writing with other people when I was younger, like being in a band or being in a duo and that kind of thing. But just to do it alone took me much longer because of that.
Yeah, I found that one of my best productivity, I guess, things or piece of advice that I've heard is done is better than perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes where
perfect is the enemy of great.
That's
or
right.
Good. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sometimes put it out there and let everyone else decide whether or not it's good. You editing and making every single note perfect and the performance perfect, all that. I mean, there are great albums that have mistakes on them. So, but we're now lowering the time frame of our podcast in this new format, and I want to talk for another hour and a half. So maybe we'll do that. You know what we should have? We should have the Patreon. We should have a Patreon page where afterwards we have a full hour and a half afterwards that you can subscribe and listen to the rest of the interview.
Because that's the thing. I could just keep going in general.
That's right.
With
Me
all
and you
this
both.
kind of stuff.
Two of you, this is ridiculous.
Me and you both.
But
But
the
Phil,
producer is telling you we have to cut it.
There's
Yep.
a
one more time. Let's give them where they can find your stuff. your social media, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, you can find all of my music or our music, depending on what era it was, under the name Wild Decade. So wilddecade.com, and then all of our socials, obviously Spotify, Apple Music. If you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, if you're on X/Twitter, we're there. So like I said, I've been playing live a lot more. There hasn't been the same promotional cycle that there usually was when we were recording, and we toured on the West Coast. We were doing a lot of different things, but I would say just go to Wild Decade and give it a sample and see what you think.
Give it a little taste.
Yeah.
Let's give it a little taste, guys.
There's singles,
Dip a toe.
EPs.
That's right.
There's remixes other people did for us.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I won't say which ones, but there's songs up there like there's songs I really
The
love.
Chemical Brothers did a remix of one of the
of something or other for somebody else. No,
But, hey,
yeah.
Phil, I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks, Patrick.
Everyone watching, we appreciate you listening, watching. Comment on this stuff. It really helps propagate it. If you have yet to do it, go down, like, subscribe, do all that sort of thing. Thank you to our patrons. Thank you to our sponsors. Phil, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming and drinking some cognac, and maybe we'll play some guitar after this.
Thanks for having me.
For a little bit, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Say bye, Phil.
Bye, Phil.